Have you ever had that feeling, where your business's overheads seem to be growing way faster than your actual revenue? Or maybe you found yourself wondering which customers, which products, heck, even which internal departments are really making you money and which ones are, well, quietly draining your resources. Sometimes the numbers you see in traditional accounting, they just don't tell the whole story. So this deep dive, it's all about unraveling those kinds of mysteries. We're going to explore something called activity-based cost management, or ABCM. It's a really powerful approach that goes way beyond conventional accounting to reveal the real DNA of your business. Imagine a company, right? Let's call them Innovate Solutions. They're constantly scratching their heads over shrinking profit margins, even though sales look strong. Our mission today is basically to give you a shortcut to understanding how ABCM could shine a light on their hidden inefficiencies, just like it does for, countless business owners, stakeholders, decision makers.
And ultimately lead to maybe better work-life balance and motivation just by providing these crucial, really precise insights into resource deployment, product costs, pricing strategies, all that good stuff. We're drawing our insights today from a really comprehensive webinar by Madhahat Shisagar. He's the director and CEO of Quantac Consulting. And this guy, he brings over 4 decades of experience, like top management and EBCM consulting, working with major global companies. So this material, it offers a fascinating look into how businesses can gain real clarity and actually drive performance. Okay, let's unpack this. As we dig into Madhar Shivsagar's insights, what really struck me right off the bat were some of his foundational home truths about costs and pricing. They kind of make you rethink some common assumptions, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. A key takeaway for me right from the start is that crystal clear distinction he draws. He says, cost is a fact, pricing is a policy, estimate is an opinion. And that, immediately sets the stage from a much more precise, much more objective way of looking at your business.
Yeah, no room for fuzzy thinking there. And then he talks about unabsorbed costs. It sounds a bit like money, just
Sure.
poof,
Yeah.
evaporating. Can you maybe paint a quick picture of what that actually looks like in a business? And maybe, challenge us a bit on why it's so critical to track.
Yeah, definitely. So unabsorbed cost, basically, it's a cost that isn't directly tied to a specific customer, internal or external. Think about idle machinery, maybe.
Hmm.
It's still racking up depreciation and maintenance costs, but it's not actually producing anything right now for a paying customer. That's an unabsorbed cost. It's there, it's real, but nobody is directly paying for it in that moment. And it's super critical because traditional methods, they often just kind of lump these costs together or spread them thinly, missing where they truly lie. So the company just absorbs them generally. It really makes you ask, well, if these costs aren't owned by a specific product or customer, who is accountable?
Okay, so it's not just like an accounting term. It's a symptom of inefficiency maybe, forcing bonuses to carry costs that aren't actually generating revenue. That really underlines the need for clarity, doesn't it?
Right.
And the source also points out how activity-based costing, ABCM, it goes beyond just looking at the expense line. It recognizes the causal relationship, the link between cost drivers and activities. Think of it like if you build custom widgets, right? That's the activity. That directly drives the cost of specialized labor, maybe specific materials. Those are the cost drivers. Traditional accounting might just see labor and materials as general buckets, but ABCM sees the why and says, oh, that cost happened because we built that specific custom widget. Plus, there's some subtle but important points too, right? Like, not all expenses are costs. My daily coffee run, not a product cost.
Right. Definitely not.
And not all costs are product costs. That big R&D spend might be strategic for future stuff,
Yeah.
not tied to what you're selling today. ABCM helps untangle all that.
It really does. It brings that necessary granularity.
So it sounds like ABCM is this amazing solution,
Yeah.
but, if it solves all these problems, these corridor gossips he mentions, these hidden frustrations, why isn't every single business already doing it? What's the biggest hurdle, you think, stopping companies from jumping in?
That's a really critical question. And the source material, it paints such a vivid picture of those very real corridor gossips and home truths, the stuff that plagues organizations. It shows the real-world frustration ABCM aims to fix. I think often the biggest hurdle is actually recognizing the true symptoms, or maybe understanding what the symptoms are pointing to. Companies often see declining profitability, but maybe for no obvious reason in their current reports. Or they keep winning sales for products they're actually least efficient at making. Those are huge red flags. Or, as the source calls them, symptoms for ABCM analysis. But you need to know how to read them.
Right, that lack of clarity you mentioned, the wonder why feeling. It really hits home how much traditional accounting can leave hidden in the shadows. You hear people saying things like, our overheads are growing faster than our business. I wonder why. Or, what are our real indirect costs? What about these transfer costs between departments?
It's like trying to navigate using a blurry map when you desperately need, like, a high-definition satellite image to make smart decisions.
Exactly. And to put that in context, a core issue the source highlights is the no consensus on and ownership of the costs. You literally hear departments saying things like, why should my department bear this cost? We didn't even incur it. Or, look, I don't accept the sales-based allocation you're trying to push onto my department. It becomes, as the source perfectly calls it, the ultimate blame game scenario. Nobody owns the overall problem. Right? Like that old office jokes, not my circus, not my monkeys. But on a massive company-wide scale, and it's actually costing potentially millions. And it's not just the numbers, is it? There's often this no analysis of activities, its costs and deliverables.
Wow.
So you have departments maybe feeling underutilized, or questions about how much internal coordination actually costs, or even the cost of basic business processes, like order processing or running the MIS systems.
Which really begs the question, if you don't understand what your activities cost, how can you possibly streamline them or improve them effectively? The source points out this leads to no realistic profitability of product, customer channel, and geographic segments. So managers genuinely aren't sure which products or customers are making money and which aren't, or whether the regional offices are actually profitable. And this uncertainty, it directly cripples strategic decision-making.
And that feeds into a deeper strategic misalignment, right? Like, what is the actual business strategy? Are we trying to be the cost leader, a differentiator, focused on a niche customer? And crucially, does everyone, all the stakeholders, even know that? And are the business processes actually set up to support that strategy?
Good point.
And operationally, how do you measure things like non-financial, key result areas, KRAs, or customer satisfaction, if you can't clearly link them to performance and maybe rewards? The source really hammers home that current systems often just fail to identify the true product cost or the cost of quality or even support strategic goals properly.
They just aren't built for that level of insight.
Okay, so let's see how ABCM actually flips this script. How does it turn all that confusion into clarity? Let's dive into some of those concrete examples from the source material. The case studies are incredibly illuminating. They really show how it peels back the layers.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. What truly stands out is how activity-based costing moves beyond just the summary expense lines. It dissects the precise cost of specific actions, giving you that granular detail you were missing.
Okay, take case one. Conventional versus activity-based overhead, accounting for a payment center. So traditionally, you might just see a total overhead figure, say 12 million Indian rupees, broken down by general stuff like salaries, rent, postage, the usual suspects. But with ABCM,
Right. The activity view takes that same 12 million rupees, but breaks it down completely differently. It shows costs for specific tasks, things like payment validation, generate EFT payments, wrap sort, and mail checks, and so on, each distinct action. This then lets you regroup those activity costs onto cost objects, like the type of payment, and bam, you see the cost per transaction. For instance, an electronic payment cost. Get this, a mere 0.06 Indian rupees. Peanuts. While a manual check payment costs a staggering 83.21 Indian rupees, huge difference. The immediate takeaway is just so powerful. Now you know what it actually costs to make a payment transaction after deep analysis.
wow, 0.06 versus 83. That's not even in the same ballpark. That electronic versus manual cost difference is truly eye-opening. It makes you wonder, right? How many businesses are just unknowingly bleeding money on processes they assume are efficient, simply because they lack this kind of granular data?
Exactly. It's hidden waste.
And the pathology lab, case 2, that's another fascinating example. Conventional accounting just shows total lab staff costs, maybe some supply costs.
Yeah.
But ABCM, it breaks it down into the specific activities: lab reception, sample collection, lab analysis, reporting.
And it takes it even a step further. It allocates those activity costs to the different types of pathology tests. Suddenly you see that, say, a hematology test costs on average 75.38 Indian rupees. But a histopathology test averages 465.63 Indian rupees. Like the source says, now you know what it costs for a lab test versus what you pay for it after deep analysis.
Yeah.
This kind of data is absolutely vital, not just for setting prices, but for making strategic choices about which services to maybe promote or which ones need process optimization.
Absolutely. And this level of detail, it isn't just about products or services, is it? The source also talks about typical strategy-related cost objects. ABCM lets you slice and dice costs across other dimensions, like the cost of dealing with different types of dealers or serving specific geographies or industry sectors,
Right.
even tracking costs across a customer's life cycle event.
Yeah, that's powerful.
And it points out something startling. Often over 50% of overheads can be tied up just in managing channels, dealers, distributors, etc. This kind of segregation helps not just with pricing, but with actually improving those processes and optimizing channel performance, making sure your strategic efforts are, actually cost effective.
So zooming out a bit, all these detailed insights, they translate directly into significant deliverables and really tangible benefits for pretty much any business.
Oh, they certainly do. And these deliverables, they aren't just like dry accounting terms. They're the building blocks of a smarter business.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine being able to confidently shift resources away from a product line you thought was profitable, but ABCM shows is actually a silent drain. And then boosting the real money makers. That's the power you get from knowing your real costs. It leads to sharper product group profitability, much better product mix decisions, precise calculation of those pesky unabsorbed costs, and really effective cost reduction plans.
And what really stands out to me here is how ABCM directly impacts managers' understanding of their actual workload and their team's workload. It clarifies those customer-supplier relationships, including all the cross-departmental dependencies, across the entire value chain. And it prompts this necessary, thorough review of organizational procedures. It really lays a solid foundation for continuous improvement, not just financially, but operationally, too.
Yeah, the advantages are super clear. It gives managers the full picture of cost drivers, which helps with big decisions like, should we outsource certain non-core activities? It uncovers opportunities for sometimes profound business process improvement, maybe even re-engineering, like focusing hard on improving receivables to compress the whole supply chain cost structure.
Makes sense.
And crucially, I think, it inserts customer values into the heart of managerial decision-making. So you start thinking about the real cost of things like after-sales service escalations and how they impact not just the bottom line, but customer satisfaction and loyalty.
Which leads us to consider, okay, beyond just controlling costs, how does all this precise information actually get used day to day in the real world? The source explains it's invaluable for things like accurate inventory valuation, getting truly accurate product costs. Also, for performance measurement, that's where activity-based management, or ADM, comes in, setting meaningful performance incentives, and even helping with employee retention just by clarifying roles, contributions, and value.
Right. So ultimately, why should you use ABCM? Why go through the effort? The source describes it beautifully, I think, as a fine art of management of activities. It provides that far more precise breakdown of indirect costs, leading to what they call nearly true costs, much closer to reality. It eliminates that common frustrating problem of undercosting some things and overcosting others. And because all those overhead costs get clearly owned by the heads of departments, the HODs.
Yeah, the ownership piece.
Exactly. There's no blame game, just shared accountability. This apparently leads to 100% acceptance of the cost data, which makes control much easier and more collaborative. It helps HR set meaningful KRAs, optimize resource use. It even helps the sales team create pricing that's both competitive and profitable. Ultimately, the claim is it gives relief to pretty much every employee, right up to the managing director, by ensuring accuracy, reducing frustration, and maybe even, as the source cheekily suggests, giving them more quality time for their families.
Well, less time chasing ghosts in the numbers, maybe.
Exactly. Less chasing ghosts. That's a huge promise of relief and accuracy. So let's look at how specific departments actually get transformed by ABCM based on those detailed examples in the source. This is where the practical application really comes alive, showing how this sort of quantified approach filters down into daily operations.
Yeah, a key takeaway here is seeing how that quantified approach to daily life, which sounds a bit abstract in the benefits list, actually manifests across these different functions. It provides really actionable insights tailored for each department.
Right. For example, take the accounts department, case one. They go from just a general list of expenses, salaries, rent, etc., to seeing detailed activities, things like accounts payable, statutory compliance, product costing, real work being done. Then those activity costs are specifically allocated to the different strategic business units, the SBUs, SBU1, SBU2, SBU7 in the example, which reveals the true share of accounting costs each SBU is actually consuming.
And that helps tremendously in allocating costs for genuinely fair SBU performance evaluations. It shows exactly where each SBU's share of the financial overhead truly lies, based purely on their actual activity and consumption of accounting resources. It gets rid of those arbitrary, often unfair allocations.
Yeah, no more peanut butter spreading of costs. Then there's the sales and marketing department, Case 2 analysis. This one's even more granular. It identifies core versus non-core activities first, then processes like channel management, sales promotion, and critically receivables. Get this. Receivables management tied up 42% of other costs and 36% of the total costs for the department. That's a massive hidden drain just sitting there in unpaid invoices.
Wow, 36% just on chasing payments or managing receivables. That's huge. And the analysis goes further, breaking down costs by individual dealer and by product group. And, maybe most strikingly, by geography. It shows this incredible swing in the sales to cost ratio. It was down at 9 for the Northeast region, but up at a highly efficient 44 for the South. Now, that kind of data immediately prompts serious strategic questions about regional presence, where to invest more, or maybe even where to pull back.
Totally. And speaking of dealers, there's that net contribution cliff chart. This was a real eye-opener for me. The source points out that the bottom 30% of dealers can actually bring down the total net contribution by a whopping 16%.
16%.
Yeah. That's a huge, often shocking insight that conventional reporting would completely miss. It identifies which relationships are literally destroying value, even if they generate sales volume.
That's powerful stuff. Moving on, in the quality department, Case 3, the activities identified include things like online inspection and monitoring and third-party inspection. The analysis again categorizes core versus non-core, but importantly, it assigns functional ownership of the quality costs. For example, the cost of inward inspection gets owned by the materials department because that's where the activity benefits. In-process inspection costs go to production. Finished goods inspection costs are owned by sales or marketing. This clarifies accountability right away and stops quality from just being this black hole cost center nobody really owns.
Right. It connects the cost to the beneficiary. And finally, the purchase department, Case 4. Activities range from material procurement planning all the way to logistics and dispatches, and even follow-up for payments to suppliers. And this analysis, it even details the supply chain material overhead percentage for different types of materials, like raw material versus consumables versus spares, and it shows drastically different overhead percentages for each. This allows the purchasing team to focus their improvement efforts where they'll actually have the biggest financial impact, maybe automating orders for low overhead items, for instance.
Which really brings us back to a fundamental question. Why are activities specifically so uniquely critical for this kind of deep analysis? What is it about focusing on activities that cuts through the noise that traditional methods often leave behind?
Yeah, the source spells it out really nicely. Activities are, well, they're actionable, aren't they? They're what the company actually does, day in, day out. They consume resources, people's time, materials, machine hours, and those resources consumed by activities are then ultimately consumed by the products, services, or customers. It's like tracing the actual flow of work, not just the abstract flow of money on a spreadsheet.
And what truly stands out, I think, is their ability to be easily understood by lots of different groups within the company, not just finance people. This allows their costs to be tracked and measured by the beneficiary, the department or product that actually benefits from the activity, and that builds consensus on how costs should be allocated. It makes the whole process, as the source says, apolitical. It helps get rid of that blame game we talked about.
Yeah, it's like everyone can finally agree on who used the office printer and how much, rather than just splitting the toner bill evenly and arguing about it. It feels fairer.
Exactly.
And they directly link planning and control. They integrate both the financial side and the non-financial performance measures, like quality or turnaround time. They really highlight those cross-departmental interdependencies, how sales actions impact production costs, for instance, and they facilitate a true understanding of the real cost drivers. The source makes this really profound statement, I thought. You need to walk well before you run, driven by all HODs and not by finance depth alone. It's about collective ownership, not just a finance exercise.
Which clearly leads to the significant value added that we see highlighted in those client testimonials. And these testimonials, they're more than just, glowing reviews. They seem to point to a universal truth. ABCM doesn't just cut costs. It often sparks a real cultural shift. You see companies like Thermax finding in-depth knowledge they lacked before. Jindal Iron and Steel experienced quantification of cost, generated a lot of excitement, and achieved substantial savings. That highlights how clarity can actually drive motivation.
Yeah, excitement about cost accounting. Who knew?
Right. And Raymond's managing director called it an eye-opener. Syngenta's head of finance praised how educative and eye-opening the introduction was, and specifically noted how it simplified the process of compilation into a very user-easy format, making it practical.
It really sounds like it's about more than just cost reduction, important as that is. It's about cultivating this quantified approach to daily life in the business, wiping out that silo approach of stubborn, archaic working methods, as the source puts it, and leading directly to improved throughput, profitability, and employee motivation. This truly does sound like uncovering the DNA of business, just like the Cost Intel logo says. Wow, what an incredible deep dive into activity-based cost management. It seems really clear that understanding the true cost of every single activity, and crucially, how those activities connect right across your organization, it can be genuinely transformative. It really is about shedding light on those hidden inefficiencies and clarifying profitability, where maybe it was just murky guesswork before, giving you that high-definition picture of your business we talked about.
Absolutely. And, it reminds me of that famous quote by Lord Kelvin, "You cannot manage what you cannot measure." And as we've clearly seen today, ABCM really helps bridge that measurement gap, especially when you think about those strategy barriers. The source mentioned that shocking statistic where maybe only 10% of strategies are ever effectively executed, often because of these disconnects in understanding costs, aligning incentives, and budgeting properly. ABCM provides the measurable insights you need to actually execute the strategy.
That's a great point. So what does this all mean for you listening right now? Maybe next time you look at a balance sheet or a profit report for your own business, or maybe for a company you're advising or investing in, take a moment to consider all the underlying activities that actually contribute to those top-line numbers. And ask yourself, how might understanding the true granular cost of every single activity, every product line, every customer segment, how might that fundamentally shift your strategic decisions? How might it change even your daily approach to work and resource allocation? It really seems like a powerful way to rethink your operations from the ground up and ensure that every action, every cost incurred, truly adds value, moving you from constantly wondering why to confidently knowing how.